Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. Happy to be with you once again. I am Tyler Donahue. In just a moment, you'll hear from Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider at linesto247.com. And what a time this has proved to be for Penn State's recruiting efforts. They have 7 commitments added since March 25th, 6 of those commitments since April 12th, and 2 of them since Friday. Those are the 2 that we're going to focus in on here during the show. A couple of linebackers coming on board for the Nittany Lions, one premier state player here in the state of Pennsylvania, another out of Virginia. Tyler Calvaruso is going to work our way through those recruitment processes, through the prospect profiles, and ultimately what the fit looks like long-term for each of those defensive pickups for Penn State moving forward. The Nittany Lions also hosted one of the premier prospects in the country, a 5-star player out of California. What kind of impression did they make? Where are the Nittany Lions located in that recruitment moving forward? And so we got a lot to dive into here as the Nittany Lions class continues to take shape. 15 players now pledged to the 2026 recruiting class. That is the number 4 class nationally in our 24/7 sports ranking. So we'll dive into a lot of this discussion right now with Tyler Calvaruso. In case you missed our last episode of the podcast, which dropped on Friday, May 2nd, we did a lot of spotlight on Trevor Pena, the Syracuse transfer receiver making his way to Happy Valley. We had an Orange insider, Mike McAllister, from within our 24/7 sports network to break down a lot of what Pena did during his time with the Orange and rolling it forward, what he thinks he might be able to accomplish here in Happy Valley. So making you aware of that in case you missed it to close out last week. And we'll get rolling right now with Tyler Calvaruso on this latest episode of the Lions247 Podcast. Tyler, seems like lately we've got a commitment to talk about just about every episode. Today we've got 2 of them to discuss. And as I alluded to there in the intro, this Penn State class has essentially doubled in size during the last 6 weeks or so.
It's filling out really nicely, which I can't say that's something I necessarily anticipated. There was a point where it seemed like a lot of these specific recruitments were going to go through the official visit process. That's obviously not playing out that way. Last year's hot streak came in June through July. You're seeing an earlier hot streak here for Penn State. They're really loading up in that 26 class. They're really filling the group out nicely ahead of the beginning of the thick of official visit season. And a lot of these recent gets top priority targets, not just guys where you had questions. Are they going to be a take? Are they not going to be a take depending on the way things play out? No, the guys Penn State has been adding to its 2026 class, they've been priority prospects and priority targets for the staff for an extended period of time. So these aren't just recruiting wins for the sake of recruiting wins. They are very notable recruiting victories for James Franklin and company.
We've been discussing the theme here for the 2026 class, which is stacking key commitments in the home state for James Franklin and company. You can certainly add Terry Wiggins to that list out of Coatesville High School in Pennsylvania. The number 13 linebacker nationally, number 226 in our top 24/7 rankings, the number 7 player in the state of Pennsylvania, 6'3", 210 plus pounds. Committed on Friday, a bunch of coverage up over at lions247.com, including commentary on Wiggins' decision that he provided to national analyst Brian Doan. So a lot to check out over at the site. But here on our podcast, let's break down the discussion into a couple pieces here. We'll talk about the other linebacker pickup in a moment. But when it comes to Wiggins, detail the recruitment process for how we got to this point and how Penn State ended up in the driver's seat when a decision came last Friday.
Yeah, Penn State had to play a little bit from behind here, which you might not have expected. I think it's a credit to the job the Syracuse staff, Fran Brown and company, did recruiting Wiggins. They built some really strong relationships. They presented the fit in that defense really well. And Wiggins getting back to Penn State for the blue-white game was really what turned the tide here, because he was able to get back to town, see his fit in Jim Knowles' system, meet with Knowles, discuss it in depth. So essentially, Knowles really was the closer here, kind of in the way we used to see Manny Diaz go out and close once Penn State would get guys on campus. And the way Tom Allen closed this past cycle when Penn State got guys on campus. Knowles sat down with Wiggins, sat down with the Wiggins family, outlined the fit, and what was conveyed to Wiggins and his camp went over really, really well, because obviously he's part of the class now. You got to give Dan Connor a lot of credit as well. He played a big part in Penn State being able to overcome Syracuse, retake that lead, and secure a commitment. What Knowles did was great for Penn State in this situation, But Connor had built up such a trusting relationship with Wiggins and those close to him throughout the recruiting process. The Coatesville staff specifically, Connor has some ties with those guys, and they've played such a big part in developing Wiggins from the start. They're a big reason why Wiggins is the player he is right now. So having that familiarity and be able to build up that level of trust over time, Connor, he did a heck of a job here, and I think he's checked a lot of boxes for Penn State since assuming that linebacker's coach duty full-time. He's done a really great job. Wiggins is his biggest recruiting win to date. For me, frankly, and I wrote this morning, I think of all the guys Penn State has added recently, Wiggins might be my favorite in terms of skill set and potential impact. I think he's a high level prospect, and I think he's going to be a welcomed addition to this linebacker depth chart. But it wasn't always looking like that. There was a time where it looked like it might go another way. But in the end, Penn State wins. They keep one of the top talents in Pennsylvania. That's always the goal.
From a size and skill set standpoint, it certainly seems to be a guy who has versatile paths to the playing field. When you talk about the linebacker room, we know that's kind of in a bit of a transformative offseason with Jim Knowles and kind of a different defensive structure. And we're going to learn more about what that unit looks like come fall, how many guys are going to get consistent work. But when you kind of look at the measurements, 6'3", 210, roll that forward, 220 plus pounds as a freshman, we'd imagine here with Penn State. That size checks off some boxes. And then you turn on the tape from last season as a junior, 11 tackles for loss, a guy who was pretty active getting to the line of scrimmage as a disruptive pass rushing presence at time as well, showed the speed off the edge, but also showed the ability to use some of that length and physicality to shed blocks, get after ball carriers. So when you kind of review the big picture of where this young man is and his progression as an individual prospect and what that might look like for Penn State moving ahead, what's the match, what's the fit, and where do you think he particularly shines right now?
He's going to slot into that will linebacker role on the weak side. I think that's a really good spot for him. But we've heard and seen the term chess piece thrown around. I think that's a very appropriate one in this situation on a couple different fronts. One, because of the way we know Jim Knowles likes to operate and the way he goes about calling his defense and plugging guys into spots where he feels he can get the most out of them. Wiggins has a skill set where that's pretty much him to a T. He can make plays from sideline to sideline against the run. He's good working in the box. His athleticism allows him to drop into coverage. I mean, you go check out his junior season tape. There's plenty of film on him coming off the edge and getting after opposing quarterbacks. He can do a lot of different things for you, and he's still coming into his own physically as well. So I think as he continues to add size, which is anticipated, he's going to become even potentially more of a matchup problem for opposing offenses. And that's going to be something Knowles is going to look to exploit. I think that's part of the pitch that went over really well with Wiggins. Look, we like you on this weak side spot, but we're not going to pigeonhole you in there. We can plug you in multiple different spots. We're going to use your athleticism to our advantage. We're going to use your tool set to our advantage. We're going to get you in the spots you need to be in to make plays in our defense. And I think there's a multitude of ways Wiggins will and can go about making plays. You're seeing it during his prep career. You're seeing all the different ways he's gotten it done for Coatesville. I think that's going to translate for the next level. I think that's going to translate once he dons the blue and white for Penn State.
Early May assessment of where guys are going out of the state of Pennsylvania. We're looking at the top 10 rankings that 247 Sports currently has constructed for these high school juniors going on high school seniors. Joey O'Brien remains the number one guy out there. He's uncommitted, the crystal ball, leaning a bit toward the Nittany Lions. We've discussed quite a bit his importance out of LaSalle College High School, the alma mater of Abdul Carter, and what he could mean if Penn State can bring in the top player in the state. But you look at the rest of that top 10, Rutgers has one guy coming their way. Notre Dame has one guy coming their way. Penn State has 6 of those top 10 prospects in Pennsylvania rankings committed now in the 2026 class. Number 2, safety Matt Sieg. Number 3, offensive tackle Kevin Brown. Number 4, quarterback Peyton Falzone. Number 6, running back Messiah Mickens. Number 7, linebacker Terry Wiggins. And number 9, defensive back David Davis. And I know it hasn't been long since we brought this up, Tyler, but if Penn State is able to add Joey O'Brien to this, and I don't even want to call him the cherry on top because he's more of a foundational piece than just an extra luxury addition at this stage, but they're certainly in the thick of it with him. I've already laid out what they've taken care of business among that top 10 right now. How much of a big deal is this that Penn State is scooping up all these players before they even really get a chance to gotten about and get official visits in the books, hit the camp circuit. They have this many of the top talented players in Pennsylvania locked in before the end of their junior year. Ahead of the curve for where you maybe anticipated the class, or is this right about where your expectations were?
I think ahead of the curve with some guys in terms of timing. I think Penn State, and this goes for outside of the state as well. This goes really for the entire region this cycle. Penn State has consistently put itself in a really strong spot with a lot of the top players in Pennsylvania and a lot of the top players in the Northeast. We see that on a yearly basis, but this cycle just has a little bit of a different feeling to it based on the level of prospect in the state and in the region. Because, I mean, look at a guy, you mentioned Joey O'Brien. Look at his prospect profile. There are not many recruits in the country better than Joey O'Brien overall. And he happens to be plopped down the middle of your backyard. He's a guy, a program. He plays in a program you've gone out and recruited many, many times. You've got the relationships down there. So getting him, Jackson Ford out of Malvern Prep's another one who's a big-time target for the staff, who's a high-level prospect right in Pennsylvania. It would be massive. And locking down the guys they've already managed to lock down within the state, it's big because some of these guys, they're not going to go out and take official visits now. You know, you never know what's going to happen once OV season rolls around. Guys get out to see other places. You never know how those pitches are going to go over. You never know how the financial aspect of NIL, how that's going to be received on elsewhere during other official visits. So Penn State locking these guys in, you know, Penn State's going to be their only OV now. That May 30th through June 1st weekend, that's OV weekend for the commits. That's when a lot of these guys are going to be in town. So it kind of eases any concerns or worry you had about, all right, what's going to happen if these guys start checking out other schools? You eliminated that problem. And even with Matt Sieg, I mean, schools haven't stopped recruiting him. He's an example of what goes on. Schools haven't stopped recruiting him. Notre Dame pushed hard for a visit. Alabama's pushed hard for a visit. USC at one point was pushing pretty hard for a visit, and he shut things down. So Penn State has done not just a good job of getting these guys on board initially within the state, but keeping them on board as well. Because we always say it rings truer and truer each cycle. Got to recruit these guys just as hard as you did once they're committed. The staff does a really good job of that, and that's why they're not just on board as commits, but they're locked in as commits as well.
Yeah, the battle is ongoing to make sure these guys do reach the finish line in their home state. I think Messiah Mickens on two separate occasions now has publicly shut down his recruitment, and yet the latest thing I saw from his social media account was a picture of him and Jaywan Sider when Sider made the trip to Pennsylvania, and now Notre Dame's running backs coach. So obviously a really strong thing going there. We're going to shift out of the home state and look within the region here. And I will note, when you go north of Clemson, South Carolina, and you go all the way up to upstate New York, and you go everything east of Columbus, Ohio right now, you know, who is wielding the kind of NIL power right now that Penn State is clearly able to do, and kind of their ability to go out and hire people for this staff. Financially, who is wielding that kind of power right now? And additionally, coming off of a college football playoff run, projected to join it again here, who in this region is in that conversation right now? There's a lot to exploit if you're Penn State and you kind of look around you, going south, going east, going north. If you really prioritize a guy, you've got a lot working in your favor right now compared to a lot of the other programs within this region. And one of those players who certainly heard from several across the area is Matthew Lama, Virginia linebacker, committed to Penn State on Monday. And so you got a nice double dip scenario there for Dan Connor, linebackers coach, going into the weekend, coming out of the weekend, feeling a lot better about how this 2026 class is shaping up for the linebacker position, what that room might look like moving forward into next year. And like the last linebacker we just discussed, you're going to get some size here, 6'3" already for Lama as a high school junior. He's a guy who's going to carry more weight, though, to campus, 230-plus pounds right now on that frame. Not quite clear as highly ranked. He's the number 58 linebacker in the country. He's a 3-star prospect by 247 Sports Evaluation, but 20-plus scholarship offers. Guy that Penn State's been around for a while here now. And so, Tyler, when we talk about the recruitment process, before we talk about the prospect himself, what was it that stood out about Lama's process, and ultimately why is Penn State the hat he picks up and puts on at the end of it?
Penn State led, I don't want to say exactly from the start, since he had to, sort through his initial wave of options and wave of suitors, but Penn State led really, really early. So the Nittany Lions offered, he visited for the whiteout. And Lama was offered shortly after that visit concluded. And from that point on, really, Penn State was high on the list. Then as he continued getting to know the staff and learning more about his potential fit in the defense and getting back to campus for more visits, Penn State pretty quickly became the leader, Lama was quite candid about that in our conversations with him. It was something he said on record multiple times. Look, Penn State's my top choice right now. And his final decision coming together on Monday, I did one of the least surprising outcomes of the cycle for me, to be completely honest with you. Penn State pushed long and pushed hard here. They wanted him from the start. That athleticism stuff. He's going to be more of a Mike for Penn State. He's going to be that thumper kind of run stopper for the Nittany Lions. But I don't want to use that term and have people think that he's not athletic, because he's a very, very athletic inside linebacker. That's a big reason why this Penn State staff loved Lama's tape from the start. That's why they loved their evaluation. That's why they prioritized him as such. He's really, really good at snuffing out the run because of what he has going on between the ears with his football IQ and his ability to diagnose plays and read and react. But, man, his athleticism what makes him a really, really good prospect and a really, really good fit in this Penn State defense. There was a point where Michigan came on a little bit strong, so that was something we were monitoring. Virginia Tech was another one right there along with Penn State as one of those schools who fall into the category of, hey, we were in on you early. We believed in you from the start. But really, this one had Penn State written all over for an extended period of time.
And so it would seem that Connor is getting here a very nice kind of complementary class of linebackers thus far from these two. The way you've described them, the way I've kind of just seen them attack opponents on their high school highlights in recent days. What would you kind of describe about this class at linebacker so far? And is it an incomplete class still based on what you gather?
Still looking at add in the right fit. They love the two guys that they have on board right now. Obviously, a third would be welcomed if it's the right kind of guy. And there are some names on the board who fit that profile. The way this linebacker haul is being built and the way it's coming together reminds me a lot of last cycle, because each of the three guys Penn State signed in the 2025 class, Cam Smith, Alex Tage, and I'm blanking. Who's the third? LeVar. Jeez. But all of those guys, they do something different, and they do it really, really well. Cam Smith's that athletic backer who he's a little bit undersized, but his athleticism speaks volumes, and he's going to make plays for you in a lot of different ways, kind of like the way Terry Wiggins is going to make plays for you in a lot of different ways. Cam Smith doesn't have that, edge rusher ability in him like Wiggins does, but he's going to make plays for you in a multitude of ways. Lama's like Tage, he's that, inside linebacker. He's going to get the job done against the run. And Arrington's a little bit of both of those guys. So you're seeing, I think it's being done very intentionally as well by Connor and company. I think the linebacker additions that the staff makes, they want guys to be strong suited in specific areas and different areas. If you could stockpile talent at the position, you're going to stockpile talent at the position. No doubt about it. If guys have elite level skill sets that overlap, so be it. But with that being said, if you can identify and go out and land high level recruits who do something really, really well, and that gives you a good contrast between the other guys at that position in the class, it positions you nicely to build an elite level linebacker room. And I think that's something Penn State has always done a really good job with. You're seeing it in recruiting now that Connor is the one heading things up. Wiggins does a lot of different things well. Lama does a lot of different things well. And those two are going to play off each other, I believe, quite nicely.
Dan Connor, former All-American at the linebacker position for the Nittany Lions, one of those LBU figures over the years, now making a different kind of mark on that room as the leader, as a coach, and as a recruiter. And Tyler, as we continue to kind of look big picture here with this class, with these two guys on board, it's up to 15 players all of a sudden. As we said, that's essentially double the size of where it was in late March. The commitment spree, as we've called it in past years, maybe occurred a little earlier on the calendar this time around. What's your anticipation for it sustaining deeper into May? And where could this class maybe go by the time we get around to official visits and when they become a little bit bigger in nature in June? Is this a class that could be just about complete, or do you think it's still going to have a lot of room to maneuver?
I think there's still plenty of room to maneuver. I think the majority of it's going to come moving forward on the offensive and defensive lines. I think there's still a lot of beefing up for Deion Barnes and Phil Trautwein to do in those areas, and that's something I fully expect them to accomplish given the names on the board and where Penn State stands with those names on the board. Offensive line, we're looking at Trout putting Penn State in a good spot with the likes of Marlon Bright from New Jersey, DePaul Catholic, Grayson McKee, who's right in your backyard at LaSalle in the Philly area. That's just the tip of the Marky Wahlberg from Massachusetts. That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the offensive line recruiting. Tavion Branch, another in-state guy who's very much in the conversation. And then on the defensive line, I mean, just look a little bit ahead to what could be coming later this week with the commitment of St. Joe's Prep standout Alex Haskell. Deion Barnes has Penn State in a good spot there ahead of that announcement. And he's building on a defensive line class that already has a pair of really talented players in Daniel Jennings and Isaac Chukwara. So where do things go from here in terms of overall class outlook? There's still plenty of room for the Nittany Lions to continue adding. Yes, the beef is going to be the O-line and the D-line moving forward, but there's still spots at wide receiver. There's still a spot at tight end. There's still a desire to add a second running back along with Messiah Mickens. So there's a lot still going on in State College. And a cornerback too, Terry Smith, always looking to add. So there's still a lot going on with that board in State College. No doubt about it. I mean, I didn't even touch on what Deion Barnes is going on with his top edge rusher targets. Carter Meadows, Luke Wafel. Penn State has a real chance with those guys and two high-level prospects. So I don't think the fireworks are done just yet. Now, is this run of basically a new commit every week going to continue? We'll see, because I think some official visits, we're going to get to the point where some official visits are going to have to play out, and guys are going to start making the rounds and seeing other programs and seeing how things go for them on those visits. But we saw a hot streak like this play out last June and early July, where the OVs, they just killed it on the OVs, and we saw an influx of commitments. Would it shock me if something like that happened again? No. And it all comes back to the placement on the board with a lot of their top targets. A lot of these guys have Penn State in that top 3, top 5, top 8 range. And that's exactly where you want to be heading into official visits, especially for those who are in that top 3, top 5 spot. The top 8 guys, obviously, they're a little bit more open. Things are probably going to be a little bit more drawn out there. But when guys are narrowed down to 3, 5 schools and their focus, and Penn State's in that top group, I think based on history and based on what we've seen, you've got to like the staff's chances when they can lock down that official visit, get those guys back to campus, and do what they do while these guys are in town for multiple days.
15 guys on board so far. Number 4 class in America. Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan, and our 247 Sports Network have you covered on whatever comes next over at lions247.com. And a big part of that process will be these epic official visit weekends where you've got a bunch of guys and their families on campus, getting 48 hours to tour things, to go face-to-face, to get a real read on what the NIL landscape looks like, what their educational outlook will be in the classroom, and, of course, on the field, locking down with their relationships with coordinators, position coaches, and someone had a chance to come do that and kind of get an early taste of the official visit experience here in Happy Valley is a 5-star recruit, Brandon Arrington. And I know people hear that Arrington name and they light up because they just brought in LeVar Arrington II, son of a former great. This is not little brother situation here, but it is another California standout. And so, Tyler, tell us a little bit about Brandon Arrington, his trip to Happy Valley this past weekend, and why he needs to remain on our radar.
First things first, I mean, one of the top overall recruits in the nation. Penn State has worked just as hard on him as it has any recruit in the regional footprint. They've pushed really, really hard to not just get Arrington, but really lock in that official visit that occurred this past weekend, because that was the first step. And that's the first step with any recruit who resides across the country. When you're living 3,000 miles away, the main goal is to get you to campus, get that official visit locked in, and see what happens when he gets there. So Penn State was able to secure itself a win in that regard. Now, how did things go with Arrington while he was on campus? Based on the feedback I've received, based on some of the notes that I've been able to gather, I think it went pretty well. I think Penn State moved the needle a little bit. I think it worked itself more into the conversation than it already was. The relationships had already been in a good place with the staff, and Penn State knew that going into the visit. So a lot of the priority for this trip was making State College feel like home, despite the fact that you're 3,000 miles away from home. The people in the building matter a lot to Brandon Arrington and his recruitment. He's big on relationships. And I think the Penn State staff, speaking with some people who spent some time with him this weekend, it sounds like they were able to hit it off in that department and really hammer home what it could be like for him at Penn State if he was to suit up for the Nittany Lions. He's long been aware of his on-field fit. That pitch was furthered. I mean, he's a long, athletic cornerback prospect. Terry Smith has had plenty of success with those kinds of guys, and that was hammered home. And I think that moving forward, it was a good visit. It was one that keeps Penn State very much in the mix moving forward, but it's still going to be a difficult one, man. I mean, Oregon has built up momentum. USC is an appealing local option. I mean, USC has the top recruiting class in the nation right now. Lincoln Riley and that staff out in LA, they've got it going on this cycle. So there's plenty of appeal. A&M, Texas A&M is another school. I know it's not California, but they're another school that carries appeal, and even they're closer to home than Penn State. So I'm very much in we'll see mode. We'll see how these other official visits play out. It's not one I anticipate getting done for Penn State when it's all said and done. I think if you're a Penn State fan, you'd love for me to be wrong on this one because it would be one of the biggest recruiting wins of the Franklin era. I mean, that's really just what it is. 5-star prospect, California kid, to go out and be able to get that one done, I mean, it sends a hell of a message. And Penn State has put a lot of energy and effort into it. I think they've done really all they can, and they've given themselves a legitimate fighter's chance. I think that's all you can really ask for.
Arrington, the number 2 player in the state of California, which is always packed with power conference standouts, and then number 23 player overall in our rankings at 247 Sports, the number 1 athlete, like you said, would be a huge cross-country splash for Penn State if they were able to pull that off. They got to take a big swing during recent days here on campus, and one of those names we'll continue to monitor as the 2026 class progresses. Tyler, you alluded to this just a little while ago. We got a commitment announcement coming our way later this week. It's a guy that you and I discussed last week because he put that on the calendar. But Alexander Haskell out of St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. Before we kind of close the book here on 2026 class conversation, what is your viewpoint here? I guess about 72 hours away from his announcement on his decision. It's focused on 3 different contenders at this stage of the process. Where is Penn State situated in terms of everything you've gathered at this stage?
Got the read of this one being a Penn State-Michigan battle. I've had that read for a little bit. It's what I'm continuing to settle on going into Friday. I think if I had to pinpoint it right now, I think Penn State's in a really, really good spot. Going into Friday, I think it's an announcement Nittany Lions fans should be keeping an eye on because the staff has put in a lot of good work. With that being said, Michigan has also put in a lot of good work. That staff in Ann Arbor, they got Haskell to campus during their spring practice, and they made a move and they did a lot of good things with him while he was in town. But Penn State, they've prioritized Haskell since he was an underclassman, but really going back to when we saw him camp as a freshman, back when he was far more physically advanced than a lot of the other guys in his grade in town that day. He's only gotten better as time has gone on. His standing on the board has only risen as time has gone on. So Penn State has formed some really good relationships. It's an in-state option, which does matter to Haskell. Deion Barnes being from Philly, having those Philly roots, that has helped Penn State. I think Cam Smith being at Penn State now has also helped the Nittany Lions because those two developed a friendship over the last 2 years as teammates at St. Joe's Prep. So we'll see how things go on Friday. I think there's a strong case for both Penn State and Michigan. I think both sides have pushed a lot of the right buttons with Haskell. I like where the Nittany Lions are at heading into this announcement, though.
Penn State pursuing its 7th pledge since April 12th. If they can pick up Alexander Haskell, we talked about him quite a bit late last week and what he might mean relevance-wise to this Penn State class, and also building upon a bit of a pipeline perhaps for Penn State with St. Joe's Prep, the powerhouse in Philadelphia. Had been a long time since they signed anybody from that school. That changed last cycle. Cam Smith, who we talked about earlier this episode, he'll be joining the program as a linebacker from St. Joe's Prep this summer. If you can stack that with another commitment from their defense and Alexander Haskell this week, you start to like where things are trending. And, oh, by the way, defensive coordinator Jim Knowles with the Nittany Lions, former St. Joe's Prep player himself. Let's finish off this episode with a quick pivot over to basketball recruiting because they went international for their latest pickup early on Tuesday, Tyler.
Yeah, it's been a mostly quiet offseason for the Penn State basketball program. I think a lot of that has been done intentionally as the staff works through its transfer portal pursuits and really just building this 25-26 roster. We do know they've been scouring the international market. That's been going on for a little while. And Tuesday morning, it culminated with a commitment of international 7-footer Ivan Jurcic. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I believe I'm saying that correctly. But he's a Croatian big man. Played his prep ball stateside at Sunrise Christian Academy in Kansas, which is a really good national program. And I think when I look at this get for Penn State, sometimes with the international guys, you got to wonder about where they're at physically. What do they bring to the table? He's advanced. He's 7 foot, around 250. So adjusting to life in the Big Ten from a physical standpoint shouldn't be too difficult for him. He's a banger down low, but what I like the most about this one potentially is he could stretch the floor. He could shoot the ball a little bit. We know Penn State is big offensively on, bringing in bigs who can open things up for you and do some different things and, just make the spacing overall better. Make sure things don't get cluttered in the paint. I think you're seeing that here on the limited tape that is out there. So I'd say it's a quality addition from Mike Rhodes and his staff. It's the third international get of the Rhodes era. The first two haven't worked out all that well. Broggy Gudmundsson and Hudson Ward, they're no longer with the program. Penn State hoping for a little bit of a different story here. And I think as he settles in to the Big Ten, I think there's a potential impact player here. I see it. I think he's kind of just scratching the surface. And, hopefully Brent Scott can fine-tune some things, get him right, and he can be an impact player for Penn State in 25-26 because they need it, especially in the front court. This is a needed depth addition for the Nittany Lions.
So Ivan Jursic out of Croatia, you say that Penn State has been scouring the international market for potential roster help. Why is that an emphasis for them right now? Because I know a lot of people on the outside looking in are examining what they lost and the pieces that Mike Rhodes had kind of went out and pursued and put in place last year. It ends up being a disappointing season 2. A lot of those pieces are now no longer going to be on campus. And so in some ways, there's a bit of a blank slate for this roster, but it's a team that needs to start stacking wins in year 3 of the Mike Rhodes era and show that significant improvement. So when you mention the international angle, why is that something that Penn State basketball might lay a little bit of extra attention toward?
There are a couple different reasons. First of which being there's a lot of untapped talent overseas, and more guys are looking to come to the States and play college basketball because I think you're seeing a lot of international players who do come over, have a high level of success. So that's an avenue that is starting to carry a lot more appeal for international kids. They're keeping their options far more open to coming stateside and playing college hoops than they were in the past. There's obviously always been the international market, but it feels like a growing one. And Penn State and many other programs, especially in the Big Ten, are taking advantage of that. There's also the fact that from the Penn State perspective specifically, there are guys on this staff, Brent Scott, Crispin, they have international ties from their playing days, from their own coaching careers as well. So that makes it a little bit easier of a pursuit. When you have those ties already built in, you know where to look internationally. You're not just, plopping down on a map and trying to figure out where the talent is. No, you have an idea of the landscape. So it's a more intentional process recruiting overseas when you have that to fall back on. So all of that is why I believe Penn State is prioritizing the international market more now. I think it's a potentially fruitful expedition as well. I think it has the potential to be a benefit for Penn State and a lot of other programs as well in the long run.
Well, Tyler Calvaruso has you covered on Penn State basketball recruiting and, of course, Penn State football recruiting and transfer portal work over at linesto247.com. We talked a lot about linebacker recruiting, not so much this episode about linebackers in the transfer portal. That continues to be a position that we are focused in on here in the days ahead as Penn State looks around the college football universe, tries to see if it can maybe add a piece or two to help its national championship chances this upcoming fall. Tyler Calvaruso and our coverage team over at linesto247.com will have you ready for that one, and we'll also get you ready for that Haskell commitment coming up in just 3 days from now. Tyler, appreciate your perspective as always. We look forward to your coverage over at the site.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Lions247 Podcast. We'll come back with a second show later this week, break down whatever Penn State throws our way to discuss. We have a couple of conversations that we want to bring to you as well. And additionally, over the course of this week, head over to lions247.com for more feedback coming out of spring camp, more feedback coming out of these commitment pickups for Penn State, and the latest on transfer portal notes and nuggets from our coverage team. For now, stepping aside, this has been the Lions247 Podcast. I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening or watching.